Good to be with you, friends, on this a very special day in the life of our church. We heard this morning a reading from Jesus' so-called Sermon on the Mount. A little bit later in that very same section of Jesus' teaching, he says to his disciples, "Don't store up for yourselves treasure on earth. Treasure on earth decays and eventually even goes missing. Rather, store up for yourselves treasure in heaven. There it will not decay and it will never go missing. Where your treasure is," he went on to say, "there your heart will be also." I heard once a kind of modern parable. There were two farmers whose land was side by side. And in the area where they were living, there was a great drought. Both farmers believed in God, and they prayed desperately for rain. Only one of those farmers went out and prepared the fields and planted seed. Which of those two farmers do you think trusted God to send the rain? God invites us to look forward to the future with great hopefulness. And God invites us to do this not so that we can be optimists, not so that we can be people who look at life with the glass as half full, wonderful as those two outlooks may be. God invites us to look forward with hopefulness because our hope is grounded on the promises and the faithfulness of God. A God who has spoken to humankind in centuries past, who has formed a community of people which transcends time and space, a God who promises to continue to be with us, a God who promises to be at work for good in the world, a God who promises to be faithful to those promises which have long been spoken and long been treasured by God's faithful people. That portion of the so-called Sermon on the Mount, which Larry read for us a few minutes ago, as he said, is known as the Beatitudes. Many of us, if we grew up in Sunday school, were taught to memorize the Beatitudes. That term simply comes from the Latin for blessed, the word which begins the teaching of Jesus in a series of phrases. Now, these phrases of the Beatitudes have long been held and treasured as a guide for faithful and godly living. Blessed are those who make peace. Blessed are the humble. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are those who long for righteousness. And indeed, these Beatitudes do provide a kind of guide for faithful and for godly living. We ought to strive for those aspects of our character and our outlook which are therein described. Many people, however, miss the second half of each beatitude, or the second half of each phrase. Listen to this one. Blessed are the humble, for they will inherit the earth. The second half of the parable points to a promise of God, a promise whose fulfillment is in many ways the opposite of what we would expect in our world, the opposite of what we would expect for the future. Who possesses the earth now? The earth is possessed by the strong, by the powerful, by the rich, by the aggressive, by the violent. God promises something different. Blessed are the humble, that they will inherit the earth. When will they inherit the earth? In God's promised future. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. They will be satisfied. How can we believe this? Because God promises it to be true. Blessed are the pure in heart. They will see God. When will we see God? When the kingdom of heaven comes to its eternal fullness. And when we are drawn into the presence of the Almighty for an eternity of adoration and praise. Blessed are those who make peace. They will be called children of God. Not blessed are the victorious. Not blessed are the powerful. Not blessed are those who are fortunate enough to conquer and to divide a plunder. Blessed are those who make peace. They will be called children of God. These phrases of Jesus, these Beatitudes, point us not just to a kind of faithful and godly living today. They point us to a future hope. They invite us to live and work in ways today which help to build the foundation upon which God's kingdom will be built for the future. These ways of faithful and godly living are the ways we store up our treasure in heaven. Treasure that will never decay and never go missing. Too much future, you may say. What about all the difficulties of the present? What about all the difficulties of the past? What about all the water under the bridge? You and I think, are often the kinds of people that look back on the past and think that if only things would be different in the past, they'd be better now. They'd be better in the future. We want to be like those characters from the 1980s film franchise Back to the Future who have invented time travel and who want to change the future by going back to the past. But you see, that is simply science fiction. It's not how the world works. We all need rear-view mirrors in our cars. We need to glance at those rear-view mirrors from time to time. But we certainly can't drive down the road just looking in the rear-view mirror. We would soon get in a crash. We look out the front window to see what's coming. There was a famous British preacher in the last century. His name was Leslie Weatherhead. During the First World War, he was a soldier in the British Army. And he spent some time during the war in Persia. And while he was stationed there, a local friend took him to a shop where the famous Persian rugs were made. And what he saw was a remarkable operation. There was the great room with workers and craftspeople, and hanging from the ceilings were the rugs. And on the decorative side of the rug was the master weaver, and on the other side of the rug were the apprentices. And the apprentices would be on the back, and they would be feeding through the thread at the direction of the master weaver. And Weatherhead was struck especially to see that sometimes these apprentices would feed through the threads in the wrong way or in the wrong place. And every once in a while, the master weaver would ask the apprentice to pull back that thread. But much more often, the master weaver would take the mistake of the apprentice and weave that mistake into the design, sometimes making it ever more beautiful. Friends, God is weaving a beautiful design with our lives. God is weaving a beautiful design with the life of this church community and with the life of other church communities. So let us look forward with great joy and hopefulness to the work of God in and through us. God, the master weaver who is storing up and building upon our treasure in heaven. Praise be to God. Amen.